But today, again, getting back to the topic of our webinar, I thought I'd open with a few interesting study notes and some statistics that were gathered by an organization that I'm sure is familiar to most of you, and that's the Ponemon Institute. In a 2000 study that was recently released, there were some interesting statistics with regards to just what is taking place in today's threat landscape. Over the course of 2015, it was found that there were recorded well in excess of 1.5 million cyber attacks. How that really breaks down is approximately 4,000 attacks each and every single day. If we break that down even further, that comes to approximately 170 attacks per hour, or on average about 3 per minute over the course of 2015. That's certainly some eyebrow-raising data to share, because that puts things into perspective when it comes to the discussion that seems to be taking place on a daily, if not hourly, perspective when it comes to how we can appropriately protect our own networks. Some further information that's shared through that study was that through 2014, just about 47% of American adults had personal information stolen by hackers. And in the 23+ years that we've been around, and obviously more so frequently, we get asked on a regular basis from our clients, how can we best protect ourselves, especially in today's dynamic and ever-evolving threat landscape? How can we most appropriately come up with a plan or come up with ways to protect the things that we designate as very sensitive to our business? And we like to answer that question on a very consistent basis by telling our clients that the best way to do that is to arm yourselves with as much information as possible. The unfortunate reality today is that you just cannot prevent attacks from taking place, and you cannot protect your network 100% of the time. But you can arm yourselves with all of the information possible so that you can make educated decisions on your cybersecurity strategy based on your specific needs, and sometimes even more importantly, your budget. There is a wealth of information out there, and today we're going to be providing you with some of that information that fits into anyone's budget, because that's going to be free of charge to everyone participating. So again, as I mentioned earlier, accompanying me today in the presentation are a couple of individuals from an organization that we've grown to trust over the years, and I'll provide you with a little bit of information on Check Point. They were also founded about 23 years ago, so they've been around as long as NCA has. But Check Point Software Technologies has been recognized as a worldwide leader in securing the internet, making the internet communications and critical data secure for their clients. What we've grown to really appreciate about the organization is that they invest heavily into their engineering resources, which means that they're constantly looking for and striving for ways to improve their solutions that they provide. To that extent, Check Point does currently hold, I think it's approximately 39 US patents, and they have almost an equal number more pending, meaning that the technology that they're creating also evolves, or they're attempting to make that evolve as quickly as possible so that you are better positioned to leverage the tool sets that they offer to address that dynamic and evolving threat landscape. With that said, I would like to turn things over, and I'll provide a brief introduction to who will be presenting today from Check Point. My counterpart, Robert Cooke, is also a senior account executive with Check Point. He is specializing in the threat prevention arena, but more importantly as well, attending today we have Daniel Wiley. He's the head of incident response at Check Point and their advanced security operations. And that includes Check Point's incident response team. In his role, Dan works with their customers to identify and contain and remediate threats and provide actionable intelligence. He's got vast experience that spans well over 20 years in the cybersecurity industry, including verticals like government, civilian, and even service to provider environments. I'm going to hand things over because I know everybody's here to obtain some very helpful information. We'll close after Daniel's had a chance to introduce himself and Robert's had a chance to provide a brief introduction as well. So with that, I'll turn things over to my counterpoints from Check Point.
Great. Thank you very much. This is Dan Wiley, Head of Incident Response. So we wanted to break up the session into two areas. We wanted to talk about a case that we've recently worked that revolves around advanced threat actors and how we dealt with those attackers inside of this customer's environment. And then Rob's going to dive into some more of the technical details of the solution set and provide you some more technical meat around the solution that we offer. So I think without too much further delay, I think we should just go ahead and dive right into the case study that we recently worked. At the end of the day, the incident response team does one thing. We help customers when they are in really big trouble. And one of our customers gave us a holler. And they contacted us and said, hey, Dan, we are looking through all of our data sets and we're seeing something really weird. We're seeing that almost all of our PCs in our LAN are connecting to a single IP address in Australia. And we have no clue what that IP address is all about. We've got the URL logs, we start looking at it, and we come to the conclusion really, really rapidly that this customer is not going to have a good day. We find very rapidly inside of the logs that they gave us, it's very busy, so I apologize, but the key areas are all of the red areas. This is a telltale sign of advanced malware phoning home and beaconing information to this site in Australia. And at the end of the day, what you can see here is that each one of these requests from all of the PCs within this customer's environment were connecting and providing information like computer name, user ID, and also added some information around processes that are running, and even giving some clues to some malware that was actually hosted within that customer's environment. At this point, we started working with the customer and we started looking at the entire environment. We reverse engineer the actual communication process of this malware. And we find some really interesting things. The first thing is that the customer was doing some things right. The first thing, they had a proxy deployed. So we actually had URL logs, and we could actually reverse engineer some conversations. We also had the ability for some more advanced controls like application control and some other controls that the customer had deployed. But this customer also made some very critical mistakes. They did not have any advanced protections or sandboxing technologies. They didn't have a segmented environment, which will become very important in this conversation. And then they also just didn't have an updated environment. The good news is that we were able to actually get the patient zero. And we started reverse engineering what patient zero actually did. So this company makes medical devices and has manufacturing divisions all over the world. And we were able to isolate it to a single system in Mexico. And when we started reverse engineering that PC, it became very interesting to us that the customer had downloaded Bible software. And the customer then came to the conclusion that they would actually have to pay for this software. So the tech that had downloaded this software decided that he was going to go get a key generator program. And that key generator program basically creates a license key to unlock this software. Well, what the tech did not realize is that by executing this nice little exe, they started a chain of events that was very dire for this company. What this software actually does is allows you to create the license key, but then also installs a very, very, very nasty Trojan. We continue to reverse engineer this environment, and we were able to extract a significant number of key elements. And we found very quickly that this customer had downloaded something called Stego Loader. And we'll talk about that in a second. But the key thing here is that remember how I said hundreds of PCs were phoning home to the CNC? What happened is that single keygen software, when the customer had installed or double-clicked that software, it had started propagating across the entire network. And this malware was so advanced that it was able to do pass the hash and some other techniques to be able to deploy this malware across the entire enterprise in 10 minutes. This is pretty advanced stuff. So we identify all of the information about patient 0. We're able to identify all of the key elements to the actual malware. And we actually observed something very, very interesting. All the malware across the entire environment was also downloading images. Hundreds of images. Very pretty images. Maybe this one isn't so, a little more industrial than pretty. But it continued to download images, and we were struggling. Why on earth was this malware downloading images? What was happening was, as the malware was propagating across the network, the malware was also getting additional information through these images. Each one of these images contained additional malware components to allow the initial malware to gain more and more capability sets. So these images actually have stenography in it, and cryptographically, and stenography within all of these images. So each one of these looked like normal traffic, looked like normal web traffic for users grabbing images. This is fairly advanced stuff. And we're finding more and more malware today contains the ability to use very advanced techniques like stenography and encryption to be able to hide the fact that they're installed and hide the communication patterns out to the internet. So as we're reverse engineering all of it, we came to the conclusion that we needed to be able to find all of those images. We needed to be able to find the actual malware across the environment. We also determined, as we were studying this malware, every single time we installed advanced tools onto a PC to be able to identify this malware, it would disappear. So it had many, many different security mechanisms to detect if there were any advanced tools to actually study it. So since it had persistence in the network, it had the ability to say, okay, if you install a memory grabber, for example, you go ahead and just unload and disappear. The malware would do that, because we know in an hour or two we can reinfect that machine because you don't have any security controls to be able to block the original malware. We also found that it was had really interesting ways of persistence. The primary module didn't have persistence, the secondary does, and I won't go into all the details, but the basic key element to this is this malware had the ability to hide itself, protect itself, and regenerate itself across an entire environment. The key components to the actual malware would allow the remote attacker the ability to do basically anything. So we saw it stealing banking information. We saw it stealing PDFs and designs and financial information. So it had the ability to basically be anything, and the attacker was using it for multiple things within an environment. Now, what became very interesting to us is that we were able to actually identify it very rapidly with very simple indicator types like domain names, URLs, IP addresses, file locations, memory indicators, and all kinds of other stuff. But the problem was that the company that we worked with had no advanced endpoint technologies. They literally just had McAfee AV. And with just McAfee AV, it was very difficult to be able to identify this advanced malware because the indicators are so basic. If it's not every single MD5 was different, for example. So we couldn't just place a single block to block of one MD5. We had to identify network traffic and file locations and memory indicators. And most of the current AV solutions just don't have that capability set. So at this point, it became very important for us to get additional visibility at the endpoint. Also on the network too, but it was really, really important that we had the ability to see this malware on the net. on individual PCs. Remember, I told you this customer had also made a critical error that their network was completely flat. So there was no visibility on the network to be able to see the lateral movement of this actual malware. So we started deploying additional controls. We saw that AD was missing this, so we deployed both network controls, but we also saw just started deploying endpoint controls. This customer also made a very critical error. They were still running Windows XP, and you all go, oh no, why was he running XP? Well, because their manufacturing systems were all still running XP, and they aren't going to migrate from XP anytime soon because it costs them tens of millions of dollars. So there was no way of getting rid of XP, but we still needed to be able to deal with this actual infection. One of the key things that we had to try to explain was how was this malware actually moving laterally. And we were able to do that through a couple mechanisms, but ultimately, since the customer didn't have any of these advanced controls and still running XP, we literally had to deploy honeypots and other technologies to be able to identify this. But at the end of the day, the most important component that allowed us to see the entire environment very rapidly were advanced endpoint protections. At the time, this customer, this event happened almost 6 months ago. We were still in very early EAs for our Sandblast endpoint agent. We actually deployed it in this environment, and that allowed us to be able to actually see the lateral movement within this environment. And once we were able to do that, we were actually able to tell the entire story. We did all of the PCAP analysis, but at the end of the day, with the Sandblast agent and TE, threat emulation, at the edge and at the middle of the network, we were now able to actually see the malware moving from one zone to another, and we could also monitor and see what account was actually compromised. For this customer, it didn't end very well. We actually were able to determine very rapidly that almost all of their domain credentials were actually compromised. They actually had used domain admin privileges as the same username and password as local admin. And if anyone's managing AD, they probably will go, oh God, why did they ever do that? Well, that was a really big mistake, and all the attacker had to do was get local admin, and they now had actual capabilities to drop the malware across the entire environment seamlessly. So that's, be careful around AD security. It's one of the #1 issues out there. But we also interfaced with a lot of our contacts in law enforcement and within the dark web. And during the same period of us investigating this event, we actually determined that their infrastructure was up for sale in the dark web, and someone was actively trying to sell his access or his botnet, the botnet that we were investigating, on the dark web to threat actors. This really woke up the customer, and they finally understood that that they really needed to invest in security. And at that point, we started coming up with a remediation plan and also a full deployment of all of our advanced threat prevention technologies. There are a lot of lessons learned. We can go into more of the technical details if anyone would like after the presentation. But at the end of the day, a lot of mistakes were made, but what we find is more and more customers are just not realizing that the controls that they have in place just aren't effective enough, that they really need to move to the next generation technology sets. So continue looking at your controls, understand that they need to provide additional capabilities around threat emulation, forensics, and having the ability to react very rapidly in these environments is absolutely critical to respond to these attacks. So at this point, so this was just a quick review of a case that we'd worked. I'm now going to pass it over to Rob, who's going to go into some of the technologies that we used in this case to actually mitigate the attack that we saw.
Thanks, Dan, and NCA team. Appreciate the introduction. I'm flying blind here a little bit because I'm not actually connected to the the GoToMeeting, so I'm going to ask Dan to control my slides for me. But my name is Roff Cooke. I've been with Check Point here for 4.5 years. And in the last year, I've transitioned into a role that is specifically dedicated for our threat prevention technologies, namely our Sandblast product, which is our solution for zero-day. And I cover a territory right now that incorporates basically half of North America. So working on those frequent flyer miles regularly. But if we look at statistics around advanced malware, unknown malware, what we found in our 2015 security report, and we have a new report upcoming, this should be no surprise. The growth in new malware that we saw between 2013 and 2014 was about a 71% increase. And I think in the last 9 months in my role in talking to customers, what we're discovering and what we're finding is not necessarily that enterprise customers or medium-sized businesses are necessarily discovering true zero-day attacks, but what they're really struggling with right now are those unknown malware variants and those obfuscated malware variants of known existing threats that can be easily changed and easily obfuscated to avoid traditional signature-based detections. So as you all probably know, the industry has responded with a technology called sandboxing. And if we look at how a traditional sandbox works, that technology is essentially examining system registry, keys, unnecessary network connections. It's looking for abnormal activity outside of what a signature-based protection like antivirus or IPS would otherwise provide. One of the problems that we're seeing, however, with traditional OS level, operating system level sandboxes is that they are highly, highly prone to evasion. And some of those evasion techniques that we're seeing and talking to our customers about at Check Point could be anything that ranges from time-delayed malware to malware that detects the virtual environment, and every sandboxing technology out there, regardless of vendor, provides custom VMs to basically detonate and analyze those files dynamically. Different OS versions is another common problem, and then obviously encrypted channels or encrypted traffic is a huge blind spot for the majority of organizations. I think I saw a statistic recently from Gartner saying that SSL traffic within the network enterprise is expected to grow by 15 to 20% over the next 2 to 3 years. So that's one problem right now with traditional OS level sandboxing. The other problem that we see is that computationally, sandboxing is really expensive, meaning that it introduces latency, it affects user experience, and for that reason, a lot of customers that have deployed a sandboxing technology don't always do so in a blocking or a proactive preventative mode. So with that, what we're trying to do is kind of take a different approach to sandboxing. Now, it's important to realize Check Point certainly was not first to market with sandbox. I mean, it's not, we're known as inventing and patenting stateful firewall back in the early 90s, but we've always had a huge commitment to innovation. And while we might not be first to market with a product or a solution, when we do come to market with a new technology within our product portfolio and in our solution suite, we really try to differentiate, and we try to do so in a technical fashion. So back in August, July of last year, we officially launched Sandblast, which was a predecessor to our original threat emulation engine, or a sandbox that had been available to customers for almost 2 years at that point. And there are really two cornerstones of Sandblast from a technical perspective that differentiate it from other solutions in the marketplace. One a technology that we incorporated from a company that we acquired early last year called HyperWise Technology, and it gives us the ability to do CPU level detection on top of our operating system level, on top of our OS level sandbox. And the other is threat extraction, which is essentially a separate engine within inside of our sandbox that eliminates metadata from incoming file types right now in SMTP traffic and soon to be HTTP and HTTPS downloads. So Dan, if you go to slide number 7, I can explain a little bit about the CPU level detection. Okay. So what we're doing differently, let me back up here. If you look at the typical attack infection flow, typically an attacker is trying to find a vulnerability within an unpatched system to then basically launch an exploit, inject shellcode. Typically within, after the shellcode injection, there's also evasion code or evasion techniques that are incorporated in that malware. But essentially, once they have shellcode injected into a system, they can essentially run any malware that they want. And so while common traditional sandboxes look at millions and millions of malware signatures, and they're looking at how do certain file types react, how do they behave within that OS level sandbox, what we're doing with Sandblast and our CPU level detection is really looking at the exploit code. And this is important because we're really trying to, we're essentially narrowing down the attack surface for the user. So rather than trying to keep up with hundreds and hundreds of unpatched vulnerabilities or thousands of unpatched vulnerabilities that are out there on a weekly or daily basis, or trying to keep up with millions and millions of malware signatures, which we do in our ingested threat intelligence and threat cloud, we're really only looking at a handful of exploit techniques that can happen at the CPU level. And we're doing this with open Intel architecture. We're essentially monitoring the assembly code process at the CPU to ensure that those calls and returns match sequences. If we determine that a call does not match a return or has a dangling return in the CPU level process and that machine level code, then we can immediately determine that code or that file type is malicious in nature. The other thing about CPU level detection that I'll mention real quickly is that it does allow us to be OS agnostic. So we're detecting the attack at a much earlier phase. We're not necessarily relying upon specific images that get passed to the sandbox for full emulation. It allows us to really be OS agnostic in the way that we detect a malicious attack. And then the second piece of Sandblast is really, it's more or less a methodology, and I think it's a really interesting one, but it's called threat extraction. So all we're doing is essentially scrubbing the metadata out of incoming documents, flattening that file, and delivering clean, flat files to the end user, completely clear of executable content. Now, what's interesting about this is that we're not making a security decision right there on the front end. We are essentially eliminating or reducing the attack surface for the customer, enabling the business processes to continue. And then on the back end, what we do with threat extraction is pass that document or that file type to our sandbox for a full heuristic analysis, because we want to understand if we determine that the file type is malicious in nature, we want to understand the full heuristics of that attack so that we can generate a corresponding signature almost immediately. So, I spent 4 years on the federal team, and we had had difficulty getting into some of the large intelligence agencies in Washington, D.C. Last year, we actually had one of those large intelligence agencies approach us specifically about threat extraction, and their interest was not so much in what we were doing from a technical perspective. They had their own secret sauce that they were doing to essentially scrub documents and then analyze them dynamically in a sandbox on the back end. But they essentially came to Check Point and said, from a methodology standpoint, you all are right on the money, because rather than trying to determine what's malicious and what's benign and waiting for the sandbox to respond, you're essentially reducing or eliminating that risk and eliminating that attack surface for incoming documents for the end user. So right now, as I mentioned, this feature, this engine is supported in R7730. We currently support it with SMTP traffic. We have support for HTTP and HTTPS downloads coming here in late Q1 of this year. So I think it's important to note as well that, you know, and one of the common themes with Check Point is that we're a step ahead with our technology. Last year we participated in the NSS Breach Detection Systems report. It was the second time that NSS had performed this group test. We achieved a 97.2% detection rate, and we achieved 100% detection on HTTP malware, email malware, SMB, and drive-by exploits. So we're really, really excited about these results. Obviously, you have to always take, I think, third-party testing with a grain of salt. But if you look at the security value map that NSS released, this is very similar to Gartner. So they do a TCO metric on the horizontal axis and essentially a security effectiveness metric on the vertical axis. And Check Point, along with 4 other vendors, received a recommended rating, even in our first participation within this test. So we were actually the only vendor tested that emulated all file types in a cloud-based environment. Every other vendor that tested here was either was primarily on box, or with Cisco, as you notice, they actually achieved a higher security effectiveness rating than any other vendor, but they were the only vendor who deployed a host-based solution alongside a network sandboxing solution as well. We actually, I'll make one more note about the SDM graphic. We went back and we retested with 10 gig interfaces on our 13500 platform, and with that, we actually achieved about 7 gigabits of real-world threat prevention traffic through that box, which actually pushed our TCO further to the right and reduced our overall cost for the solution. So if any of you all would like to, read our NSS Labs BDS report, I'm happy to share those results with you. I can't share other vendor results, but I can share the security value map, and I can share with you the exact details of how Check Point performed in the test, and it gives you the NSS report gives you a good outline and detail of the methodology that NSS deploys in these tests. Now the BDS, real quickly, the BDS test, I want to make note, is not our first NSS Labs test. We have a long-standing history of good success with NSS Labs, what I like about NSS is that they're really the only third-party testing agency out there that truly kicks the tires on products, and they do so in a relatively agnostic way. So they define the same security requirements for all vendors. They purchase the equipment from these vendors. They allow the vendors to participate in some basic tuning of their products before they test. But unlike Gartner, NSS doesn't call customers and ask them what are they using for next generation firewall or inline IPS. NSS takes these these products that they see as leaders within the security space, and they kick the tires on them. They run them through a rigorous set of tests. And as this slide shows, we've succeeded very, very nicely with every test with NSS that we participated in. So in terms of deployment, you know, like everything at Check Point, we offer easy, fast, simple deployment is what we like to talk about, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that our foundation is in software. So, you know, it's an age-old adage here at Check Point. We really want to allow customers flexibility with how they deploy. But for this specific solution with Sandblast on a network-based level, you have the ability to essentially deploy it one of two ways. So you can run a dedicated Sandblast appliance, which incorporates the Haswell chipsets that do the CPU level detection, or you can take any existing Check Point gateway and point that gateway to our Sandblast cloud and offload emulation to our cloud, which takes care of kind of the computational expense of doing sandboxing. All of that, whether you're running a dedicated Sandblast appliance or emulating file types in our cloud-based infrastructure, either scenario is fed by our threat cloud architecture, which is exactly like it sounds. It's a dynamic database of all of our IPS signatures, malicious URLs, bot-infested websites. I just got some updated statistics this week on total data in and out of Threat Cloud right now, and what we're seeing on average per day is about 2 million new pieces of threat intelligence daily, with about roughly 1,500 new signatures spun up on a daily basis. So it's a tremendous architecture that we have. It allows our customers to really automate and share intelligence into that database. And it means that, you know, if an organization halfway across the world gets hit with a 0-day and we discover that 0-day within our Sandblast sandboxing solution, spin up a signature, that any other customers who subscribes to Threat Cloud worldwide benefits from that immediate signature generation and that immediate protection. One more thing on deployment that I think is really exciting that's coming. You know, some of the conversations that I've had here in the last 9 months in my role have really been around how do you provide visibility into Office 365 environments. As most of you all know, Office 365 is an encrypted cloud email service, and it's a blind spot for a lot of organizations. And what we're really trying to do with this next deployment option is solve that problem and give customers visibility into their Office 365 traffic. So initially, we are going to be able to deploy this solution without any on-premise equipment other than just a single checkpoint gateway in BCC mode, which means that enterprise users and the NTA will receive a copy of the potentially malicious file type. And that file type will be inspected and analyzed within our cloud within the same guidelines that we do for on-premise solutions with dedicated checkpoint appliances. What we're looking to add and what will probably be available for customers with this deployment option by middle of the year is the ability to actually put the solution in line and do full prevention with the NCA cloud. So one of the other items that we have upcoming, be on the lookout for, you know, here in Q1 of 2016, is our Sandblast agent. And Dan made mention of this product and of this solution in his portion of the presentation. But it's essentially a host-based solution that works with endpoints, desktops, laptops, to both prevent zero-day attacks and then identify contained infections. And then really I think the differentiator with this product versus other EDR solutions in the marketplace is our forensics capability. So if you were looking at this from just if we're looking at this first slide here for Sandblast Agent, it's three components or three engines. So we're doing emulation from the actual endpoint host, and we're offloading that to either a dedicated Sandblast appliance or to our Sandblast cloud for emulation. We're doing command and control containment when a bot infected host is identified, or when a malicious host is infected. And then we're providing the tools for incident response teams to actually get to the root cause analysis with a bit of automation that other EDR solutions don't provide. So Dan, I'm now looking at, slide am I on? Sorry. Flying blind here, so bear with me.
17.
17, exactly. So as I mentioned, we're doing full emulation off of the actual endpoint host. And sorry, having a little bit of issue with my slides here. So we can take those incoming file types and offload them either to our Sandblast cloud or dedicated appliance. What we're targeting here are endpoint hosts that might be compromised in a situation where a customer isn't necessarily connected to a corporate VPN, or they might have a removable media device like a USB device in which they introduce new file types. So we actually are doing a local store on the desktop itself. I think the cache is about 1 gig, roughly. And then once the host comes back online and is able to connect to either the Sandblast cloud or a Sandblast appliance, we can then send those files for immediate dynamic analysis with all the CPU level detection capabilities and threat extraction capabilities that I described on the network side. And we're using a web browser plugin to do this, and we're expecting this to be launched in early February. So be on the lookout for that. And then in terms of forensics, what we're really offering customers that I think hopefully will solve the problem is that what we've seen and what we've discussed with the majority of customers that have looked at Sandblast is that incident response folks are very expensive. There's a lot of heavy manual lifting that goes along with actually determining root cause analysis when a host is infected or when there's lateral movement of malware. So what we really want to get to is what was the damage, how did the attacker get in, who else is compromised, and what resources are part of the attack. And we want to gather all of that, hopefully, into actionable information that provides you immediate response. With the forensics, you actually have the ability to once the initial analysis is done of that specific endpoint host, you can generate scripts for remediation, and it really takes the heavy lifting out of the incident response process that the majority of organizations face. I'll give you one example, and then I'll jump to my last 2 slides here. But I worked with a large civilian agency in the federal government for 3 years, and they had a large checkpoint footprint, and they weren't necessarily using our layer 6, layer 7 technologies, but that was one of the conversations that we were having was around advanced threat prevention. So I got to know this branch chief who essentially had 60 analysts underneath him for an organization that was roughly 180,000 employees throughout North America. And all of those 60 analysts would do is sit around and look at new malware samples that they were seeing gathered from their endpoint hosts and from their network-based devices on a regular basis. And he told me that they were essentially only able to get to the top 10% of those potential threats or those suspicious activities that they were seeing from a malware analysis standpoint. So as I mentioned previously, what we're really trying to do is solve that problem for incident response teams, for security operations center teams, to automate the forensics piece of when a host is infected by providing good actionable intelligence that not only helps you analyze the attack vectors and the origin of the attack and what triggers were created as a result, but also gives you a path as an administrator to respond with more immediate action and to respond with more immediate action. So closing the loop on Sandblast Agent, the real focus initially is protection and containment with our emulation off of the endpoint, but we want to generate or give customers the ability to have actionable forensics and response and create new policy changes, IOC updates, and essentially remediate infected hosts much more quickly than they can today with some of the tools that are in the marketplace. So last slide here, 3 takeaways. Like I mentioned, Check Point was certainly not first to market with a sandboxing technology, but I think we're doing some things differently. The combination of CPU level detection and what we're doing in terms of looking at incoming documents and flattening those files to reduce latency and reduce the attack surface for the customer really gives us an advantage over other vendors to put this solution in line. We certainly have the option in terms of deployment to be a detect, monitor only solution, but that doesn't take away the problem of patient zero infections. You know, it provides visibility. We really want to be a solution that customers look at as preventing that first unknown malware instance from even entering the network or even getting to that host level, so that hopefully you don't have to use these other tools that we provide around forensics capabilities or emulation off of the endpoint. But I think the entire suite, now that we have the Sandblast Agent in process or soon to be released, is really a nice end-to-end solution for unknown threats for 0 days. We've been getting a lot of traction with customers, a lot of great conversations. I have a group of engineers that I work with in the Western region. We can certainly demo this even over a WebEx very effectively. So feel free to reach out to me after this webinar if you'd like to see a deeper dive in terms of how does the product actually work from a technical perspective. What are the actual attacks and malware variants that we're detecting? How do we detect those advanced exploit techniques like return-oriented programming? We're happy to walk you through as a customer or even a partner, you know, how we do these things and how we're different. So with that, I'll turn it back over to AC, unless you all have any questions for Dan or myself.
Thanks, guys. This is AC. I think we're trying to get some questions posted from the panel or through the panel console itself, as mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So, in an attempt to read through some of the texts that were submitted here, I think the first that came through. Let me pull this one up. So if I'm reading this correctly, the question is the email offering a cloud-based service and is on-prem hardware required? So for SMTP, presumably, and the Sandblast technology.
So great question. 2 ways that I can answer that. Today, we can do full NCA support with a dedicated on-premise appliance, meaning a dedicated Sandblast appliance. So when we deploy that as an NCA to look specifically at SMTP traffic, we're just looking at SMTP traffic. The second way that's coming, the second way of what we're trying to do with NCA that's coming here in late Q1 is essentially for those customers that are offloading emulation to our cloud with Office 365 environments, we're going to have an MTA almost as a service deployed within the cloud that can decrypt that Office 365 traffic, do full dynamic analysis on those file types within email, and then pass along to the end user once a verdict is reached. So either solution is going to require some on-premise equipment. It's just a matter of whether or not you deploy via a dedicated Sandblast appliance in line as an MTA, or you offload your emulation from a Check Point next generation firewall or next generation threat prevention gateway to our Sandblast cloud.
Awesome. Thanks very much. The next question really, I think, is more of a broad or general-based one. It seems as though we have some participants that may work in organizations or be associated with organizations that are multilingual, and they're just confirming that they want to know if the interface provides any sort of multilingual capabilities, number one. And then what is the standard time for setting up a proof of concept or trial?
So multilingual capabilities, absolutely. We are, we're a worldwide organization. We're about 1.7 billion in sales and revenue, and so yes, absolutely multilingual. We have customers all over the globe that are using Check Point today. In terms of POC, we can absolutely commit to bringing in a device, whether that's a dedicated Sandblast appliance that the customer wants to throw in off of a span or a tap, or the other way that I've seen customers look at this technology is to bring in a Check Point gateway with all software blade engines turned on, also typically deployed via span or tap. We don't want to be disruptive. We don't want to be intrusive in our POC process, but we can essentially turn on all software engines within a dedicated Check Point gateway appliance. Run it for as long as the customer desires. Typically, we see 1 to 2 weeks, and then we give you a nice report at the end of the day that breaks down the traffic that we saw off that span or tap deployment, whether those are bot-infected hosts, malicious URLs, and then anything obviously that's also analyzed in our Sandbox suite as well.
Terrific. And then just a point of clarity on that, then as long as the customer provides the span or tap port and or an appliance that can presumably has the capability to mirror the traffic, then the question is, how long does that setup typically take?
I've seen security checkups done with Check Point appliances and set up at a customer in less than 45 minutes. Obviously every customer is different. We want to understand the environment and understand the actual traffic that we're getting visibility into, but typically a security checkup, which is a free service that we offer here at Check Point, I've seen those stood up and deployed in less than an hour.
Terrific, guys. Thank you. And then presumably, lastly, the location for that appliance to be installed would be right at the major ingress/egress point to the network.
Typically, yes. That's what we're looking at, and that's that you bring up a good point there, AC. One of the advantages that we have with existing Check Point customers is that we do hold those key real estate values at the egress points to the majority of networks and within the customers that we work with, and so that's been a huge advantage for us in deploying this solution. And I've seen a number of instances where we've competed heavily against other sandboxing vendors for customers' advanced threat prevention business. And the fact that we can essentially enable a software license and operationalize the cost of sandboxing for them is a huge, huge advantage.
Well, we know we're bumping up on the hour here, so we sincerely appreciate everybody attending. Again, what you can expect is for NCA to follow up with you. We will be soliciting comments and feedback from you. Additionally, attempting to find out if any other information is required, or if you were not able to access any of the PDF documents that were supplied through the attendee console. We'd be happy to provide you with email copies of those. If you'd like to proactively reach out to any of us so that we can coordinate efforts with the appropriate checkpoint folks, please do feel free to come to our website and just click on the Contact NCA tab at the top. We'd be happy to respond to you as quickly as possible. So thanks again, everyone. We appreciate your time, and thank you to our presenters from Checkpoint. That was very helpful information. With that, we're going to close the actual session. We'll leave the console open in case there are any lingering questions that need to be submitted, and we'll do our best to answer those offline.
All right, thanks so much for having us. You'll have a great day.
Anyone have any more questions before we close the session out? I see there's a few of you still online. I've unmuted most of you. If you've entered an audio pin, I cannot unmute you. But we'll leave it open for just a few more minutes if you have any more questions or would like to speak to someone at NCA. Thanks for joining us today.